Welcome back to the first session after the lunch break. We have two sessions actually. Before I start and introduce this session, let me make a short technical comment, and this concerns the streaming. During the morning session we had some problems with advertisements popping up there, and there is a story behind it, and we tried to fix the problem during the lunch break. And to explain that a little bit, in my family we have a rule: on Tuesdays everything is my fault. So on Thursdays you can blame it on the Bolin Center. And you can blame us because we didn't make instructions how to send us presentations super clear. It could be that the problem is because stuff was uploaded from USB sticks or downloaded from the internet. We are not sure about this problem. So we should have been even more clear that it is very, very important that you send the stuff to us before so that we can check everything and that we avoid these types of mistakes. But it is our fault, not your fault. So it's Thursday, so this is all fine. It's not your problem. We hope it will work now. We had a technician here trying to fix it, but we cannot guarantee until we actually test and see what is happening. But if it's popping up again, you have the magic hands and you will fix it. That's great. Thank you. So now we can start with the session. We have guests here today, and this session is about MERGE. MERGE stands for Modeling the Regional and Global Earth System. It's a strategic research area hosted by the Faculty of Science at Lund University. And our guests fill this entire session, so we have 4 speakers. And first one out is Paul Miller. You'll give a short introduction, and then your research area is, well, your program is structured into different research areas. So we have speakers representing all these in turn, and you will even conclude your session with concluding remarks on MERGE.
Yes.
Yes.
Also relevant to Bolin Center.
Yes. Okay. And with that, I leave over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Miller, and I'll be presenting the first part of this MERGE session. And I'll then hand on to my colleagues, Jesper, Marie-José, and David, who also come from different research areas within the MERGE strategic research area. I'll be talking about regional and global Earth system modeling activities in MERGE. I coordinate this together with Birgitte Svenningsson at the Department of Nuclear Physics in Lund University. I've been doing this for a year and a half or so, still kind of learning the ropes to some degree, but I find it a very exciting endeavor. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about what MERGE is, who we are, what we do, and where we are even physically. And then I'll talk about something that is also relevant to many of the PhD students here, and that's our Climbeco Graduate Research School. And then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the science that we do within MERGE. So we're divided up into 4 research areas that I'll come to in a moment. And I'll present the first one, and then Marie-José and Jesper and David will present other research areas. And I'll conclude at the very end, after the other speakers have spoken, with one Outlook slide that is also kind of meant to generate discussion, because it also concerns the Bolin Center, which is also the other climate research area, strategic research area within Sweden. Okay, so this one here. Okay, so what is MERGE? Nina's already said, but MERGE stands for, it's a rather convoluted acronym, trying to come up with some sort of nice name, trying to summarize modeling the regional and global Earth system. It's a strategic research area, just like the Bolin Center. The result of Swedish focused funding, research funding within strategically important areas for Swedish research and indeed global environmental research. So it was basically an increase in university funding in exchange for a commitment by the university to pursue and develop research in a specific area of strategic applied importance for Sweden. And it basically is a network of researchers. It's not a really, we all know what that is here, but it's a network of researchers at one or more universities or institutes or departments or research groups. So it's very varied, and where we all collaborate on with a certain common focus. And modeling the regional and global Earth system, MERGE, was one of 2 successful proposals in 2008, the other one being in the area of climate models, the other one being the Bolin Center. The strategic research areas, and I'll come to this at the very end again in terms of my outlook, will be evaluated in either 2020 or 2021 with a view to being permanent in 2021. That's the hope anyway. So our aims within MERGE are to advance the state of the art to representing, and our focus in particular within MERGE is the biosphere atmosphere forcing within the Earth system and their feedbacks. We also would like to contribute to national and international efforts to describe and attribute climate change, for example, within the CMIP process, which I'll come to in a while, which underpin policy responses, for example, underpinning the IPCC reports. To educate as well, to link very strongly to graduate research, graduate education, and to undergraduate research education, to educate a new generation of climate experts, Earth system modeling experts, to support our ClimeBeco graduate school, and also to improve the societal relevance of climate models and the results. And these are our various partners within MERGE here. So the kind of activities we do, I'm sure they're very similar to the Bolin Center. We have targeted, it's not a whole lot of money. We leverage this through combining it with other sources of finance. But we target funding for specific research topics, specific research positions as well, so ensuring the legacy of MERGE beyond the end of the project if it does end. Targeted workshops on certain specific topics. We have annual meetings just like the other strategic research areas every spring and every autumn, sometimes together with other strategic research areas. For example, we recently had a meeting with the BEC, which I'll come to in a moment, also housed at Lund University, where the focus is on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And also with stakeholder interaction. So these are, in summary, the kind of activities we engage in. And this is our home. Our home within Lund is we're coordinated from here. It's the Center for Environmental and Climate Research, or CEC for short, which gathers, strengthens, and coordinates and visualizes education and research within environmental and climate research. So it's a department within the science faculty at Lund University, engaging in research and education in environmental science, outreach and communication, with approximately 150 students and many PhD students, and that's the employees here. So within CEC, I just pointed here, it also houses not just strategic research area MERGE, but also the strategic research area BEC, which of course is very relevant to many of you as well, with the focus on biodiversity and ecosystem services in a changing climate. And you can see that climate is the overlapping or the common theme within these. We also use some of the same modeling tools, for example, the LPGS model, which I'll come to in a moment. But also houses ICOS Sweden, so ICOS, the Integrated Carbon Observatory System, and Lund University Hållbarhetsforum or Sustainability Forum. They're all housed within CEC. Okay, and ClimeBeco is our graduate research school, as I mentioned. The coordinator is Anna Ekberg at CEC. It's a common research school. It's funded both by BEC, by MERGE, and by BEC, and the Faculty of Science within Lund University. And still getting hang of these things. The target group is PhD students engaged in research related to not just climate, but also biodiversity and ecosystem services. So the vision and mission of this research school is to provide perspectives from natural science, social science, and economics. So broaden the education of our PhD students. To improve student awareness of other disciplines that are needed in order to drive sustainability research at local, regional, and global levels, and to develop interdisciplinary training to give societal context, as well as to promote improved communication skills, these kind of skills which are very, very important in today's society and within science indeed, and to improve skills within personal and career development. And then finally, we also have a very active mentor program, so to create and promote a network of peers and mentors for our young scientists. So there's a rolling enrollment process. There's about 24 students at the moment, both from Lund University within various departments, and the University of Gothenburg, also within various departments. Okay. And the activities again there within ClimeBeco are the annual meetings, specifically courses that all the students take. And then there's various optional courses, a very strong mentor program, as I mentioned, and generally a smorgasbord of courses that students can pick and choose from depending on their particular interests and timing. And in the pipeline should advertise this to support the students in co-designing to strategic development goals, relevant research in collaboration with stakeholders. And next year, BEC and MERGE are getting together with, I think, IVL in Gothenburg, so there'll be a large spring meeting on the topic of the strategic development goals. So I'm sure you'll see advertisements, and we'll send this to Bolin Center for anyone who's interested in posting this. Okay, now we come to the science a little bit. So that was a brief overview of MERGE, who we are and what we do generally. But just like Bolin Center, we're divided into research areas within MERGE. We have 4 research areas. So we have research area 1, which it can be described briefly as Earth System Model Development, so ESM, Earth System Model Development. So where we look at climate-biosphere interactions, and we use various modeling tools, the LPG, and I'll describe some of those in a moment, the LPGS, Dynamic Global Vegetation Model, a regional climate model with dynamic vegetation, the BC Earth System Model, and then there's the WRF Regional Climate Model and the COOP model as well. So these are some of the modeling tools we use within Research Area 1. So Research Area 2 is concerned with learning from the past and paleoclimate and land cover, and these are some of the techniques we use there, some modeling techniques and some observations, etc. And paleo reconstructions. So both Marie-José and Jesper will describe these in more detail in a moment. David then will describe some of the work we do within Research Area 3, which can be described as particles, but actually it's aerosol cloud parameterizations for Earth system models, and these are some of the tools we use and some of the indeed observations we use, so laboratory studies, field studies, etc., combining those with models to improve our process understanding within this very, very complex and uncertain area in climate science. And then finally we have Research Area 4, which is to do with statistics, so new methods of evaluating and analyzing Earth system models. So statistical methods. So Marie-José will touch on this as well in a while. So this is an overview of our research areas. So I'll continue on now from this. I'll talk about the first research area, and that is Research Area 1, which is to do with Earth system modeling and development. It's a brief overview of the kind of things that we're doing here. So our workhorses, as it like, and a common model within all the for the later slides is our LPGS, the Lund Potsdam Jena General Ecosystem Simulator. It's a global patch and individual-based dynamic global vegetation model and ecosystem model. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this model, but it's an offline model in the sense that I want to distinguish it from the later models, which are Earth system models or coupled models. So it takes as input CO2, nitrogen deposition, land use strategies, land use management, for example, and climate forcing, of course. And within that, then, we have process-based descriptions of primary production and growth, plant geography, soil biogeochemistry, and then vegetation dynamics in terms of population dynamics and disturbance events. And these are linked to update state variables, which to do with soil organic and matter and nitrogen using the Century model, and vegetation plant functional types, vegetation species in some cases, for example, for Europe, and also crop types now, which I'll come to in a moment. So we simulate vegetation, which competes various plant functional types, which compete with resources, so water, light, nutrients, especially in this case, and nitrogen in this case. And these vegetation, they compete, and they're subjected to stochastic establishment, mortality, disturbance events, and they compete for these resources, and you end up with an ecosystem state which changes dynamically as the forcing up here changes in time. So this is an example of simulated natural vegetation in Lithuania, and these are the various so-called replicate patches which we average over to get an idea of the general ecosystem, and we can see this kind of diversity we get here. So, oh, wrong way, direction. Okay. So we can use this in global studies, for example, to diagnose various trends we see globally, and this is a recent study which was used, LPGS, to identify the fact that savannas and semi-arid shrublands dominate the interannual variation and the current trend in land CO2 uptake. So what we have here is net biome productivity. So this is the GPP minus the ecosystem respiration minus the fire fluxes from 1982 to 2011. So the contribution in percentage from the various biomes, so tropical forest, exotropical forest, semi-arid ecosystems, tundra, crops, and sparsely vegetated areas. In the mean, the largest contribution comes from the tropics, but if you look at the trend and the variability, the largest contribution actually comes from the semi-arid lands. And this can be identified, and this is the time series of net NBP from 1982 to 2011, and you can see, and the red line is the LPGS, and you can see you get large reductions in NBP in drought years, El Nino events, correlated to El Nino events, and in wet years you get large increases in the NBP. So we can use the model to examine carbon cycle variability in this way. We can you can do projections. So if we force LPGS with RCP 8.5 climate projections, we can look at the biome shifts that we would expect to occur in the 21st century. So for example, you get into high latitudes up here, point A, which is over here in North America and North Canada. The current day vegetation is dominated by tundra type vegetation or grass. And in the future, as climate changes and as CO2 increases, we would expect boreal needleaf, evergreen trees, and even birch type trees to come in and dominate these ecosystems. So in the future, we get very different ecosystems. And we can see similar examples from around the world. We see the kind of changes that we get. We now treat land use and management explicitly in LPGS. So we have pasture, modules for pasture, for cropland, for natural vegetation that we've always had, and even for managed forests. So we can look at things like continuous forestry and detailed forestry management. And also, as I mentioned, it takes into account nitrogen limitation. We can fertilize crops, fertilize forests, and all these things can be taken into account with the model. So this is an example. We can also do projections for something of societal relevance, for example. So projections of agricultural crop yields. So these are some sort of evaluation of the model, reported yields against model yields for wheat and maize. And then we can project into the future depending on for RCP 2.6 or RCP 8.5 up to 2050. And you get, I won't go through the patterns, but you can get various trends here. So, but this model, as I mentioned, is an offline model. So you feed it in the climate, it doesn't feed back to climate. In order to capture the feedbacks of the changes, like the biome changes I mentioned, you have to couple it to a climate model, a regional climate model. And this is an example of RCA guess, a coupling of LPGA guess, which is the same process as I showed earlier, to the Rossby Center model, the atmosphere model. So LPGA guess produces vegetation patterns. It sends this information to the regional climate model. Its previously static vegetation is updated based on the LPGA guess information. And then it sends back in turn daily temperature, radiation, soil water, which is used to force LPGA guess. So you get a coupled model system. And with this coupled model system then, you have a closed loop, you can capture the biogeophysical feedbacks. But still, you have an open loop for biogeochemical feedbacks because the CO2 and the methane don't necessarily influence the climate simulated by the regional model. So we've done studies of Arctic domain. So Arctic domain, we simulated the climate change in the Arctic domain using RCA guess. This is the Arctic domain here, for example, in the Cortex simulation, and we get the same type of plots that we showed earlier. We ran the model with boundary conditions from East Earth, an Earth system model, to fit it, the boundary around here to force RCA, and RCA again is coupled to LPGA guess, and we get these kind of dynamics. So we get, generally speaking, in the Scandies Mountain, East Siberia, Alaska, and these are various regions, and then you have various RCPs here, and you get different dynamics depending on your RC. For example, in East Siberia, you get this kind of dynamics. Only in RCP 8.5 do you get the appearance of pine and spruce towards the end of the century, for example. And then you can look at this to see how it feedbacks the climate. So that's the vegetation dynamics. How does that feedback the climate? This complex diagram can be summarized if you just look at the bottom line here. This is RCP 8.5, and these are the seasons. These are the winter, spring, summer, autumn, and these colors indicate the additional temperature change that would occur because of the vegetation feedbacks. So you run the model twice with and without the vegetation feedbacks and look at the difference. And so, for example, what we see are very strong signals in the spring. You get very strong spring warming because the encroachment of vegetation to the high latitudes, the tree line moves further north, masking the snow, giving us lower albedos, giving us very strong temperature effects here, very strong feedbacks. So you get up to 1 or 2 degrees in addition to the RCP 8.5 degrees. So it's a reasonable proportion of the overall forcing. In the summer, you get the opposite effect. You get greater evapotranspiration leading to cooling, local cooling. So what you get is a flattening out of the seasonal cycle because of these vegetation feedbacks when taken into account. And finally, I have one more plot from some very exciting, very, very high resolution modeling, and the color scheme is probably not excellent here. See this from Deliang Cheng, one of your research advisors or science advisors for the Bolin Center, where he sent me the slide where they show the glacial effect on local precipitation simulated by WRF. And you get at 2 kilometer resolution for the whole Tibetan plateau. And these are glaciers here, for example, these blue areas. And you can run the model with and without the glaciers to see the effect. And what they find is that the glaciers suppress precipitation over the glacier area because of various meteorological phenomena, which Deliang can fill you in on over the coffee break, because I don't have much time to do it here. But I just want to advertise this super exciting regional climate modeling as well. And finally, for me then, I just want to mention that the RCA guess has an open biogeochemical loop. If we want to capture the overall climate feedbacks from vegetation dynamics and terrestrial carbon cycling, we need an Earth system model which has a closed carbon cycle. So we're contributing now to the Earth system model, East Earth, which you might think you've heard about yesterday. So here we have LPG gas again. It's coupled to the East Earth model, which in its when it's known as a general circulation model, it just has these components: an atmosphere, a land surface, and the NEMO ocean circulation model. But we send it now. We've coupled to this model to the East Earth. So LPG gas simulates vegetation biogeochemistry and vegetation dynamics, sending the leaf area index and the vegetation properties that are needed by the land surface model, updating those dynamically in time in response to the climate forcing. And this gives, and we update, based on this information, update the albedo, roughness lengths, and root distributions, etc. And we send, and we receive back the climate information. And you have external boundary forcing coming from the CMIP6 exercise, land use scenarios, CO2 emissions or concentrations, and from the various SSPs and RCPs for the CMIP exercise. So we have a closed geophysical feedback and also now a closed carbon cycle feedback if we couple the model to a terrestrial model of carbon transport. And we're strongly engaged in the CMIP6 exercise. We'll be starting the experiments this month, deciding on a final model version tomorrow perhaps in a telecom meeting. So we're, within Lund at least, we're very eager to participate strongly in the C4MIP, which looks at carbon cycle feedbacks to the climate. The LUMIP, which looks LUMIP, and LS3MIP, which look at land use and land surface feedbacks to climate. Together with the Bolin Center, PMIP4, working with Pyongyang's group here, PMIP4, and also scenario MIP for future scenarios which take into account dynamic vegetation. And this is an example of the kind of dynamic vegetation that we see in East Earth and the land use patterns. I've ringed certain areas. This is low vegetation fraction, and if you look at, for example, here from 1870 to present day, you get increasing amounts of low vegetation as land use takes over, for example, in the Amazon forest, but also areas in North America and even over Europe, at the expense of the high type vegetation, the trees in the forests. So I'm going to hop over this slide. We do an evaluation of LPG gas using the observed carbon cycle numbers. But I just want to mention finally then, a modeler's work is never done. We have plans, we're in the pipeline, we have permafrost relevance to this morning's session. We have permafrost carbon cycle interactions and wetland methane emissions in the pipeline for a new version of LPG gas, upcoming shortly. Phosphorus limitation, improved wildfire parameterizations, and PFTs, which are of more societal relevance. For example, PFTs that can be used for simulating BECCS, for example, for future mitigation scenarios. Okay, and this is where you want to go. Eventually, we want a couple modeling system which doesn't just look at CO2, but also the other trace gases, N2O, methane, for example, BVOCs feeding in the cloud scheme, etc. So this is our goal. Okay. So I'm going to hop over the slide and hand over to Jesper now, because that's my last slide. Oh, do you want to do it that way? Yeah, okay.
I don't know. You can decide.
That's a good thing. I can answer questions.
But you need to switch headset anyhow. So if there is a short question for Paul, we can take that when they switch. Yeah.
Impressive, but I'm missing a connection between TM5 and IFS. Do I misunderstand?
No, you don't misunderstand, because I missed an arrow in the diagram. So it is very, thank you for pointing that out. It is the case that IFS is forcing TM5 in this area, and also there's two-way connection between TM5 and IFS in this fully coupled model system. Exactly. Sorry. Thank you.
All right. But then we continue with Jesper, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so I will talk about research area 2 within MERGE, and this is about paleoclimate, and we're looking both at paleoclimate modeling and proxy data as well. So very generally, let's see if this works. Okay, very generally, this is what we're doing in research area 2. So we're using empirical data on paleo timescales and as well as models, and we want to evaluate the models, comparing to the proxy data, and develop these models on account of what we see in terms of differences. And in area 2, we have a focus on vegetation reconstructions, which Marie-José will talk about, and also vegetation modeling, which I will show a bit on later. And as a bonus information, I was actually hired by the Bolin Center about 8 years ago. So I was here once working with you. You might not remember, but okay. So I have first some some results here from Gothenburg, from Hans Linderholm, who's the leader of the Dendro Lab at the Gothenburg University. So there are a couple of ongoing projects here about the Northern Hemisphere warm season polar jet stream and the variability to extreme events over the last millennium. And then another very interesting project here, climate impacts on human health, but looking back in time using DNA. And then there are a few results from this year, published this year. And this is maybe difficult to see, but this is Hans Linderholm standing here with a cap over his face. And they've been looking at past impacts of extreme weather on Scots pine and Scandinavian mountains from this paper published here in 2018. And a couple of more results here, temperature reconstruction based on light absorption in tree ring data. Whoops, it's too fast. That's this curve. And there's very good skill in terms of temperature. So R square is about 0.64 with the observed temperatures for June, July, August. And there's in particular a very interesting feature here about 1400, a wiggle, that I see something like this also in climate reconstructions from ice core data. So I will certainly be looking at this data later. And then there's a reconstruction here of the large-scale circulation from tree ring data also covering Asia, I would say, Russia and China. But yeah, if you have questions, then you should talk to Hans and not to me about this. So here's an example of some really mergy, I might say, collaboration. We even have somebody from Bolin Center here on this paper. This was published earlier this year also, so we have Chung here working with us, and Shen Yao, he did a number of sensitivity tests using LPG gas for the Green Sahara. And these are some very interesting cave paintings showing that the diversity was fairly different back in time than it is now. Okay, so here's a very busy slide showing the model setup. So we took, mainly Shen Yao, he took model simulations from Easy Earth, which has already been published for the Green Sahara 6,000 years ago, and he took LPG gas and ran it in various configurations, investigating the sensitivity to various parameters. Asking mainly two questions here that are in the bottom. Can LPG gas reproduce Green Sahara in terms of vegetation? And how are the climate impacts on the vegetation? And we isolated these questions by doing sensitivity tests. So first, yes, it can actually reproduce Green Sahara and looks somewhat like the proxy data. So that's good. And then from these sensitivity tests, we determined that the mid-Holocene precipitation anomaly determined the extent of the vegetation, but the temperature determined the composition. Furthermore, to really get this representation of vegetation right, it's important to include the wildfire, but also the soil texture. So generally, some of these plants, in particular high vegetation, that doesn't want to grow in just what you call medium soil, but you actually need organic soils to grow trees and such. And next up is to use a fully coupled system that Paul also talked about to investigate some of these questions. Okay, then here the last study I will talk about is something I know a bit more about because I did it myself with the help of these people. I looked at the influence of volcanic and solar forcing in a process-based reconstruction, and process-based means that it depends only on physics and it's not calibrated. So I took some ice core data and I looked at the main patterns in the isotope variability of these ice core sites in Greenland. There are 5 sites with 8 ice cores, and this is seasonal resolution, and I picked the winter because that's when it works best. And And these are the three main patterns. Then I took an isotope-enabled Earth system model, and I compared the model to these patterns, and I picked all the years that matched the patterns year by year to the ice core data. And I said, this is my reconstruction. And I compared it to the 20th century reanalysis for pressure and temperature, and looks okay, I think. It has very good skill for NAO variability, also with the interannual variability amplitude. So it preserves the variability of actual atmospheric variability. We also have skill for the Eastern Atlantic pattern and the Scandinavian blocking type of variability. And then we looked at the influence of forcings. Here we have influence of volcanic forcing. And what it shows is that sea level pressure here, the response to volcanic forcing is a very clear positive NAO and associated temperature pattern here. And this is just showing the average time series for the NAO. Here's 0, here's year 5. So there's basically a positive NAO for 5 years after the eruptions. And since the volcanic forcing only lasts 2 to 3 years at maximum, this must be something that is reinforced by ocean circulation. And then we found a consistent link between the solar forcing and the Eastern Atlantic pattern. So contrary to what people who work with solar forcing mainly say, we don't see a connection between solar forcing and NAO. Summing up a bit, these are two different ways of cooling in North Atlantic, you might say. So we can have volcanic eruptions and we can have solar minima, and these acts on distinct different modes of the atmospheric circulation, and that's the main problem and the main conclusions. And further on, I'm going to look at annual and summer as well, using the same kind of techniques. Okay, so that was it from me. Thank you.
So my part will be then to continue with the second research area, and also to take a little bit of Johan Lindström's mathematical statistics area, and he is of course collaborating with all of us with different projects where he's helping us with his methods. I have problem with this now. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about in terms of the research area 2 is a Swedish project, VR project that is called LandClim. What is happening with my thing? Swedish project VR, supported 2009 to 2011, and again now from 2017, called LandClim, where Johan is helping us. You see the research area 4. In LandClim, we are also collaborating with the Bolin Center and again Sjolte. And then I will talk about a PAGES working group that I am coordinating, that is also a contribution to MERGE. Then you see other, where is the pointer here? Other examples of the research of Johan, but that I will not present here. Simply mention estimate of the extent and frequency of historic fires. So he has produced with a colleague fire probability maps, and also to assess the possible future crop yields using LPG gas and different climate scenarios. And because to run LPG gas is very expensive, he is training an emulator. This is a statistical model using only a few LPG gas runs. So these are some other examples. So why are we interested in land cover, land use change in the past for climate modeling? You know that land use change, or if you want anthropogenic land cover change, is one of the external anthropogenic forcing of climate change, and climate models are coupled with dynamic vegetation models, but past land use is not simulated directly by the vegetation models, it is prescribed. And it is prescribed from what? From information coming from other models, if you want. These are models or scenarios of land use change. They are also called anthropogenic land cover change scenarios. And these different scenarios by different groups of scientists differ very much. Here you have an example for the year 2000 PP. The scenarios by Kaplan that are called KK and Klein-Goldewitz, it's the high database that is very much used, and then a third one, Olofsson. You see that what is shown here, the forest cover, in dark green, it's 100% cover, and in yellow, red, it's open. You see that it's very difficult, and this needs evaluation. So how a way, and I should say here, I am not a modeler. I may be one of the few here in this room that is not a modeler. I work with modelers. So I am paleoecologist, I am a data empirical person. So one of the things I am doing is to reconstruct with pollen land cover in the past in a quantitative way. I use a model, it's another model, this, that translates pollen into vegetation cover using pollen records from large lakes or small lakes, given that we have values of pollen productivity at full speed of pollen. Then we can use this reveals model that provides regional vegetation cover within a 100 by 100 kilometer area, which is about 1 degree, if you want, in a map, which is a relevant scale for climate modeling. This model has been validated in Europe and Northern America, and it's currently validated in other parts of the world. This is an example. The first reveals estimates published for several time windows of, sorry, no, I should go back, sorry, what I am doing. No, I am back, sorry. Oh, so this is published in Global Change Biology by Trondman et al. It's based on 600 pollen records in Europe. We have in this publication the cover for 25 plant taxa, gridded, that we also grouped in 10 groups of taxa, PFTs, and 3 land cover types in percentage. Here comes Johan. So if we want to use these directly in modeling, we need, of course, a complete cover. And it's there he's helping us with his students to make statistical models using other things as covariates to produce these continuous maps that we have compared with modern forest data for the modern time to have a kind of validation, and we dare to use this in the past. Here is a comparison of the reveals estimates with the KK scenario in terms of openness and with the hide scenario. And this comparison for 17 population regions with a simple linear regression analysis shows that the KK scenario of Kaplan are more in line with reveals than the hide scenario. This is why in a study by SMHI with the their regional climate model. We have used both HIDE and KK to look into the effect of land use change between 6,000 before today and 200 BP. What is the difference in temperature in this case, in winter and summer, between having the potential vegetation, as it is here, so this is the temperatures, between having this or having above the natural vegetation land use, as in, what did I do now? I feel a bit stressed because it's not so much time left and I am with this. Yeah, exactly. No, but that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, it's good. Thank you. So this shows the difference in temperature between having natural vegetation or natural vegetation plus land use in KK. And as I showed you before, the KK was better, looks better when you compare with the empirical reveals reconstruction from Bolin. So we look at this one instead of HIDE, that is much weaker in effect. And the effect of deforestation is here lower temperatures by 1.5 in parts of Eastern Europe, you see here. And this is in winter. In summer, higher temperatures by up to 1 degree in parts of Eastern Europe and lower temperatures here in around the Mediterranean. So it's different from in different regions, which is very interesting. And then the explanation, of course, in winter, the albedo effect is dominant, so deforestation means cooler. And in summer, in deforested region in Central Eastern Europe, it's now evapotranspiration effect that is dominant, so it becomes warmer. While in Southern Europe, it's so dry, there is nothing to evaporate, so it's again albedo that is working here, and it's cooler. So Land Climate 2, what it is, what is new? It's the same major goal to quantify biogeophysical forcing from deforestation in Europe. The effects on regional climate, the magnitude and size of cooling and warming, seasonal and geographical differences. What is new is that we have new time periods. We put the biogeophysical forcing in context by also looking at the biogeochemical forcing. We use this term, the reveals reconstruction, in the climate runs. And the modeling approach is more sophisticated, and we use ECRs. So I have just 1 minute. So this is the other contribution to merge. This is this land cover 6K pages working group. It's an initiative that tried to gather empirical data on land cover and land use in the past for climate modeling. So we really work with climate modelers to know what they need, and they know what we can give. So we can also co-design climate experiments. This is our groups. We have five large regions. We have work packages, 4 main activities. And this is the kind of products we come out. This is the largest synthesis until now of reveals estimate of plant cover gridded based on pollen data. So I had a bit more about poor Johan, but I have to stop here. But you have seen what we do with him. So it's a lot of mapping, interpolating point data into maps. Thank you.
I'll try and do without the pointer. Okay, so Mattias Hallqvist is the coordinator. I'm from Chalmers, working for the Norwegian Meteorological Institute, really, but living in Sweden, and Birgitte Svenningsen takes care of the Lund activities. Said briefly, what we're doing is more on the atmospheric chemistry side compared to the other components of MERGE, and it's with lab studies, with field studies, and with models. So we have a collection of all of those. The basic idea is to try to get systems to improve the EC Earth model, but we kind of do lots of things on the way to doing that. We have a heavy focus on the biogenic type of aerosols and also on interactions. So just as a fast example of the kind of thing Gothenburg University is doing and interactions, they're doing experiments in the lab with kind of fresh soot. They're oxidizing biogenic hydrocarbons. The products of that coat the soot, they change the optical properties and change the lifetime. And all of this in principle should be able to help Earth system models in the future. Lots of this is also part of a big Chinese-Swedish project. It's a very large project which supports this work. There's also a big interest in this idea that the biogenic VOC somehow can change the climate of the planet, that as temperatures increase, you will increase the emissions of the biogenic hydrocarbons. This will give you more particles or will give you larger particles, and this may give you more clouds and cool the planet. It's a hypothesis, and hypotheses are there to be tested. So this is one example of testing. This is work by Pontus Roldin. I won't attempt to go into the details. For those of you who haven't seen such plots before, which is probably maybe most of you, I don't know, we call them banana plots, is the technical term. The y-axis is the diameter, so it's the size of the particles. The x-axis is just time, and the color is giving you the concentration. So if you start at the bottom end of a banana, you have almost no particles. They're very small. But as you go through the day, you form new particles and you grow the ones which you have. So this is a very complicated process, but you see that more or less every day at this site in Finland, you start a banana and you complete a banana, and you have other stuff happening. And what Pontus has done here is set up a very complicated model and compared his modeling results over these days with the measured bananas. And it's actually doing a remarkable job. This is one of the most sophisticated studies of this type of aerosol physics chemistry, I would say. I'm not going to try and attempt to explain this slide in the time remaining. This is from Pontus, but the conclusion was that things are complicated, that sometimes these aerosols are giving you positive radiative forcing, sometimes negative, and it depends upon actually the physics, the type of clouds. There's lots of competing sources and sinks. But this has been submitted and hopefully we'll see it soon in a publication. I'll go back to the stuff I work with, which is kind of large-scale ozone modeling, tropospheric ozone. For many years I've worked in Europe, so on the top left here you see a comparison for Sweden. It's a year's worth of daily data, kind of afternoon or maximum ozone. We've had good results for Sweden for a long time. Down here you see on the left, bottom left, you see California. This was very nice to see that even here where we have no experience basically, the model was working well. And on the right you see a similar comparison for Japan. So we compared with all the sites of the Global Atmosphere Watch Program, and we actually got very good results at nearly all the sites actually. Now this was part of a cooperation with biologists. There's an organization called ICP Vegetation, International Cooperative Program on Vegetation. And what they do is do lots of experiments on crops and the impact of ozone on crops. If I did have the pointer, I'd point to the top right-hand side, where you can see that as you increase the ozone dose into a crop, that's going into the stomata, you see the reduction in yield. So the more the ozone dose, the less the yield of the crop. So we've taken the EMEP ozone model results, that was my results, put that together with agricultural information, and this results in a map of the yield loss of wheat. So you can see India and China really stand out here, but Europe is also suffering quite large losses in wheat. We believe this is the best estimate, the most realistic estimate so far of wheat yield loss, because we're really calculating into the stomata of the plant and not just using ozone in the air, which has its problems. So continuing with the wheat, then the bars are showing basically total production loss in teragrams. The numbers are giving you the percentage loss. And the strange thing here is that the percentage loss is more or less the same for all of those areas. If you look in detail at the countries, you have a huge variation, but it all seems to average out. You lose about 10% of your crop. But 10% is a significant amount of food not being produced, and it amounts to about $24 billion worth of food production, which is lost. And a follow-up study to this, where we looked at more crops and then looked at stresses like temperature, drought, and insects, showed that ozone isn't the number one threat to crops, but it is actually, it's very much up there with these other threats. So it depends on the situation, but ozone should be taken seriously as a mechanism for reducing food production. Okay, continuing quickly through. Shit, it's going fast. I'm going to skip these two on nitrogen deposition. Despite the fact they were interesting. Organic aerosol. This was a very nice cooperation. Matthias Hallqvist from Gothenburg has worked for many years with Thomas Mentel from Jülich. In Germany, they have this plant chamber, they call it. You can put a plant, here a flower. It can be a small spruce tree or a pine tree. They collect the hydrocarbons coming off, oxidize them, and they see how much aerosol these plants can give you. It's been running for many years. They have lots of experience, and they understand what's going on. So we took the results coming off these experiments and we put them again into the EMET model that I work with, just to see if we could predict global organic aerosol. And despite the fact that we were using very simple methods here, I'll start on the left. This is a model versus observed organic carbon in Europe. Now, if you're an organic carbon modeler, you would say this is a really good comparison. The rest of you won't, but if you're used to dealing with this really, really nasty subject, that still is a good comparison. The correlation is good. A factor 2 could easily be explained by uncertainties in the emissions, even of the biogenic VOC going into the atmosphere. The right-hand side is the results for North America, and they're incredibly good, actually, considering the uncertainties. So here it wasn't the main aim of this study, but we're showing that even simple methods can give you quite good representations of the organic aerosol in the atmosphere. Kind of inspired by that, we decided to do the thing we'd promised for a long time, to start testing what's in EC Earth, which uses simple methods. So does NOR ESM and these other Earth system models. They basically use fixed yields. You send out hydrocarbons, you give X% organic aerosol. And this is something we can test quickly and in bigger detail with our models than an Earth system modeler can do. So we pushed these schemes through. It's very preliminary, literally in the last 2 weeks, the results. But here I compare for one site this one's in Italy, a polluted site. So this is the kind of aerosol formation from EC Earth at the top, and it's the aerosol formation from my standard model on the bottom. The blue line is the model here, and the red crosses are the measurements. And basically, you can't see a difference. It was astounding when we first saw this comparison. We had not expected the EC Earth models to do so well. We need to go through again, check we have the coefficients right, so it might get worse when we improve things. But it does actually suggest that these models are doing quite well. There is a big caveat that some of the chemistry doesn't make sense to us. And it might be that the response to things like NOx emissions might be wrong in that model. To us, it looks like it's not right. But on this first comparison, maybe you say you don't care. So we need to check that. Okay, I don't have much left, I think. Yep, conclusions. I won't read through them. They're basically saying that we're starting to understand things a lot better. We have new estimates of all kinds of emissions. We've been looking also at primary biological particles, which can be all kinds of things. The most fun thing I'll mention is this thing on the right-hand side. We bugged the models deliberately for the first time. Aphids can eat leaves. The leaves respond by putting out a pile of hydrocarbons, which again give aerosol. So as part of this study, which was also with this German group and Matthias Alquist, it's the only study I ever did where we referred to beekeepers' records, because the beekeepers keep track of honey production in the forest. The honey production in the forest comes from bees, which are using the excrement, basically, of these aphids. So you can track the seasonality of your organic aerosol production to the aphids eating the leaves on the trees. It was speculative, but to show that there is a possible important process here. So I'll say thank you for...
Thank you very much. Actually, this clock is a bit ahead. I usually don't tell people. So we can have a very short conclusion by Paul and still be almost on time. So that's great. Do we have a quick question for... Yes, right. Wait a second. Do you get the microphone?
Yeah, you have black carbon and SOA up there. One of the issues with the climate effect of black carbon is that most black carbon sources co-emit things that are precursors to SOA. And so do you have any new insights that are likely to come out of this on the balance, the net climate effect of most black carbon sources, whether it's warming or cooling?
I should just say no. It's on the way. I mean, what I showed was lab studies. We know that black carbon has this co-emission with all kinds of other stuff. These studies are also looking at the change in the density and the geometry and how that's affecting the optical properties. And I can't say where it will lead because this is really at the early stage right now. Also in front of you will know a lot more about the rest of any answer.
All right. And then we continue with a one-slide conclusion by Paul.
Yeah. So I have to go a little bit on to the end. Don't to the end. 29. Nearly. There. Great. Okay. My outlook, just as a brief summary, I would like to thank you again for inviting us to speak to you today. It's been a real pleasure to come and present our work to you all and to hear about the work that you're doing, the exciting work you're doing at the Bolin Centre. Our outlook really is that what we see within Merge is that we're going to, in the next couple of years, going to have even closer cooperation between our research areas. We saw some flavour of that in the earlier presentations. But then as strategic research area looking to the future, that there is no clear signal yet regarding the future of the strategic research areas. We're waiting for the government to kind of give us this information. But it's very likely that we will have, in fact, almost definitely that we will have some sort of evaluation in the coming years. Or it could be 2020 or 2021. Either way, it's probably the case that, I mean, science moves quickly. In the 10 years since these strategic research areas began, science has moved on. The forefront of science is no longer the forefront anymore. So we probably will have to have a renewed strategy, which will be exciting to write, I think. There is the case that modelling, there are some bottlenecks, and one is, for example, something that the Bolin Centre feels and we feel within Merge and SMHI feels in terms of modelling infrastructure, supercomputing resources that we need, data storage, etc., for CMIP6 and beyond that. That's a concern. Do we really have the resources that we need to do these kind of things that we want to do? And finally, my question then is out there is how do we encourage closer cooperation between Merge and Bolin Centre in the future? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you stay for the fika and